Vote. I'm your host, Roland Martin, also the host of Roland Martin Unfiltered. We think about some of the greatest organizers and teachers. We think about the Black freedom movement, some call the Civil Rights movement. We often hear the names like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We hear, of course, Roy Wilkins. We might hear about Fannie Lou Hamer. But I've always said two of the most unsung heroes, Ella Baker, one of the greatest organizers that we have ever seen, and also my next guest, Reverend James Lawson. He joins us right now. Glad to have him here. So I was having a conversation with Omar, who's working behind that wall right there. And we were talking about young folks and voting and how to keep people mobilized. And I said the most underappreciated aspect of the Black freedom movement is the fact that y'all taught folks. There was teaching, there was training. You didn't just wake up, go to a rally.
That's right.
You taught folks first.
We help people to interpret their history, not so much from the perspective of the conventional wisdom, from the point of view of equality, justice, freedom. That they were human beings. They had the greatest gift of life, and that they had to cultivate that gift in every respect: heart, soul, mind, strength, capacity to be alive, to be human, and to act together. So we mobilized many people. Congressman John Lewis is a consequence of that work that I began in 1958-59 in Nashville, Tennessee. We help people to prepare for the short-term direct action, nonviolent direct action, as that movement emerged. But we also help prepare people for the long run of their lives, and for the quality of their lives. And of course, a significant part of that was the fact that as a human being, you can stay awake, you can be alive, you can love, you can serve, you can dissolve injustice in yourself and outside yourself, and you can keep at it with your neighbors and with other people. So that movement was the greatest movement America had from 1775, I'm going to say, to 1955 and beyond. The 1955 20th century rendition of it was the greatest movement in modern times.
You call it, though, when I last talked to you, you have your own name for it. Other people call it the Civil Rights Movement, some might call it the Black Freedom Movement. But you invoke Rosa Parks in it.
Yes, I call the main energy of that period the Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr. Nonviolent Movement of America. Or I call it the Rosa Parks, Martin King Campaign for Equality and Justice, rather than calling it the Civil Rights Movement.
Why?
Because in a society of male domination and chauvinism, in a society where there's been for 400 years so much sexism and racism, so much economic cruelty and oppression, it all gets, the American people do not have choices. The conventional perspective of history excludes too much of the history of cruelty. James Baldwin spoke about the bloody catalog of our history. That bloody catalog is more influential today in many, many people than any other facet of American history. And it's blind, it is invisible, it's unseen, and therefore many people yield to it. The 53 million white women who voted for Trump in the last presidential election were yielding to those dark forces that are invisible, but are visible if we want to make them visible. And so our movement sought to make those forces visible so that we could see them, and then we could dissolve them. We could fight back, we could resist, we could create an alternative vision of what we could become.
I've had people tell me, dude, why do you keep focusing on the teaching and the training? I interviewed Dorothy Cotton leading up to MLK 50. And it was her last sit-down interview before she passed away. And her job, she had the most important job at SCLC.
That's right.
And in her book, she writes about it. She said, people who wanted to come into the SCLC, they had to come into my classes. We had to assess where they were mentally. She said, take out all of that other stuff that was in their head.
That's right.
She said, reprogram their brains and then send them out. And when I see what Reverend Dr. William Barber is doing, every time he and I talk, he said, we're not having rallies, we're having trainings. We're having workshops. He said, we're teaching people because people don't quite understand what is required to actually create lasting change.
In the first instance, they do not, I'll say it another way, in many cases, people growing up in the United States, birthed and raised here, do not understand that in the first instance, the gift of life is the greatest gift that we have. It is given to us. That's what the Declaration of Independence says. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal, that all are endowed with the unalienable rights of life, liberty, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, that's never taught. That's not in the conventional conversations that people engaged in around the country. In an election year like this year, 2018, that's not even, that's not either in the service or in the headlines. It's nowhere in the conversation, in the discussion of Supreme Court and the Supreme Court Justice who was recently elected. So people don't know that that's the heart and foundation of how this country came to be. In that sense, we were very, very unique as a people. Even though from the beginning, 1776, blacks were excluded, Indians were excluded, people who had no property were excluded, women were excluded. Because that whole idea was not an idea that this is our reality. That idea was we're going to create a country in which that ideal is the paramount feature of how we organize ourselves, economically and politically. That's a very, very different kind of scheme.
You were a university professor dealing with young people in a Nashville movement.
No, I was a pastor.
I'm sorry.
At first, I was a full-time organizer in the emerging nonviolent movement, teaching people the philosophy and the theory and the tactic of nonviolence. So, for an example, the Little Rock Nine, 1957, 58, 59. They were told by the lawyers and the NAACP and the white school board in Little Rock that if you get hit, you cannot hit back. If you get lots of terrible cussing at yourself and so forth, you may not cuss back. And that was a dominant pattern in those desegregation processes. So I tried to help them understand that what they were really being told was not to not fight back, but to fight back with dignity, to fight back with courage, to fight back with compassion. Do not allow the hostility to make you sick as a human being, but allow the hostility to be used that you conquer it and can live through it and work through it and become yourself a stronger person than you ever imagined possible.
You had to confront that when it came to the war. And you could have gotten out of serving. And you said, I'm not going.
Well, it was actually, it's actually something else. I met my first racist epithet at age 4 in the streets of Massillon, Ohio. And I struck out and began to fight that white boy who lived in my neighborhood. We were playmates, but he was being taught that poison. That whole experience had made me aware of the fact that I was called to be a human being, and that names and all could not destroy me, but that they had to be resisted in order to be changed. So as I grew older, I realized, therefore, that every racist law, every racist ideology, every Jim Crow law, every no to being a man, a person in the world, I had to reject and resist. Then I recognized that the Selective Service Act was also an unjust law, and that therefore I did not want to obey it. Though I had registered in the draft, I was making the effort to follow Jesus. I was making the effort to be a person who resisted every form of injustice and cruelty to other human beings or to myself. So I decided that the Selective Service Act was an unfair act. Now this later was confirmed in 1960 when in Memphis, as a pastor of a large congregation, I had 4 to 6 young black men who were college students who were not exempted by the white draft boards, but drafted. A student could be exempted. Paige Parker and others in my congregation were not exempted. So the death rate in Vietnam, in Memphis City, was 50% white boys, 50% black boys. Though white was the majority community. The same thing went on all across the country. Few people were aware of that. But that's how unfair and unjust Selective Service Acts were. So I simply said I would not cooperate with that. 67 then.
But you could have gotten away with it.
Huh?
But you could have gotten out of that.
I could have gotten out of it, of course. But that's not the way of the conscience. The way of conscience is to walk through the issues that are unfair and unjust and to deal with them to the best of your ability.
And you paid for it.
Yeah, I went to prison for 13 months, federal prison. That's correct. At age 21. 22.
Did you
In
have
favor of my college degree.
Did you have relatives, professors, friends saying,
Oh, yeah.
Jay, what are you doing?
No,
Man, you can get out. What are you doing?
well, not my close friends, not my younger brothers, not my father or mother. My family supported me thoroughly and firmly, and a number of friends in college also were in my camp and understood that it was in a way, this is what we're asking people to do in this election. You have to develop a conscience in which you know that voting and participating in resisting the wrong in your society is a part of the price you pay for the gift of life that you have received from the universe. That's part of the gift. You have to deal with it. And in the United States, we've made things so easy because we pretend we've been exceptional. We haven't had a hard struggle that the Indians didn't get decimated from maybe 11 million to less than 2 million in 200 years, or that we did not have endless wars with the Indian peoples across this nation. We've pretended all that's hidden. But the reality is that that was invisible to some. And white political philosophers, and I also think white media people, white professors, leave that history out of the public mix so that many ordinary citizens do not know the price that has been paid by other people for them having the opportunities and access that we do have today. That's part of the reality of conventional thinking.
Earlier this year, we were in Memphis for MLK 50.
That's right.
And it is still amazing and just stunning and powerful when you see that just basic sign, I am a man.
Exactly.
Where did that come from? Where, because most people see it, but that had to come from somewhere.
Yes, that's right. It comes from black song in the centuries of slavery, especially that huge body of literature, which is called the Negro Spiritual or Black Song. When you go through some of that music, and I remember, for example, as a child, singing "Go Down Moses, Let My People Go." Well, that's a liberation song. That's a resistance song. It comes out of the Hebrew Bible. That song, in many